Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here today. Today, we're going to walk through how to prepare for the application process for VA's Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, or PCAFC. My name is Andrea Sawyer, and I am the Advocacy Director for Quality of Life Foundation's Wounded Veteran Family Care Program. And joining me to run the webinar is Melissa Duncan, our lovely technology and media specialist. We have created this webinar to help caregivers like you gather and organize the right information before applying, reapplying, or being reassessed for PCAFC. This is our very last webinar this month. But if we happen to get cut off because we are at the mercy of technology and the power company, if that were to happen in the next week or so, Melissa is going to have a copy of one of the webinars that we've done this month posted on our social pages and on our webpage. So just if something happens, just know that there will be one of these webinars available. We have done them the entire month. If you attended a previous session, once again, this is the same information that we presented each time. And we were certainly, more than happy for you to listen more than once. So once it becomes available on the website, if you want to listen again, it will be there specifically for those purposes. So please use that recording to help you in this process. At the end of today's webinar, Melissa will be sending out 2 emails. The first email will contain a link to the pages that we've talked about today. You can also find those pages on our website. They will live on our website. The second email will contain a survey about today's webinar, and we would ask that you fill that survey out. We at Quality of Life do all of our programming free of charge to veterans and caregivers. So we use the results of this survey to help us secure grant funding. We also use it to take notes about what we can improve on our programming, what you liked, and what needs improvement. So we would love to receive your feedback. So when you get those emails, if you will, please fill out that survey. We would really appreciate it. Before we get started today, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. We cannot answer questions specific to your case on this webinar, so please do not type them in the chat because it may broadcast out your personal medical information or your veteran's personal medical information. If you need answers to specific questions about your situation, please apply for assistance on our webpage under the Request Assistance tab. Do not submit any request for assistance on the Contact Us page. Your contact will not be returned if it's submitted on that page. Today, for general questions, please type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many of those as we can at the end of our presentation. So let's start with a little bit of background. The PCAFC regulations was updated under the VA Mission Act of 2018, which changed who qualifies and how eligibility for PCAFC is determined. As of October 1, 2022, the program expanded to include veterans of all eras. Alongside that expansion, there were 2 major evaluation standards that were introduced. First, help with activities of daily living, or ADLs, is required each and every time an activity is performed. Second, if your veteran needs supervision, protection, or instruction, known as SPI, it must be on a regular basis, not just occasionally. So these changes make it more important than ever for caregivers to be well prepared for the assessment process. And the purpose of our talk today is to guide you through the preparation steps for PCAFC to have a more successful application. We want you to go into the assessment confident that you provided as complete and accurate a picture as possible of your caregiving situation. Remember, the assessment team does not make the final decision, but they do decide what information gets passed forward. So the information that you provide matters. So what information do you need to collect? The first piece of information you'll need is the veteran's complete list of VA disability ratings. The caregiver support program might not have this, especially if the veteran has had recent updates. The veteran should call 1-800-827-1000 to request a ratings letter. Only the veteran can make that call unless there is legal paperwork in place authorizing someone else to request the information. The VA disability rating must show that the veteran has at least a 70% disability rating to be eligible for PCAFC. Next, gather your veteran's private and community care medical records for the past 24 months. These may include providers seen through Medicare, TRICARE, or private insurance, not just through the VA. Do not assume that the VA has community care records. Start requesting all of those records now. In many states, marking the request as continuity of care or for VA medical care may allow you to get the records for a free or reduced cost. Do not download the records yourself from the doctor's website. What you as a patient can download is not as specific as the treatment records and diagnostic testing and reports that the doctor's records department can provide. If your veteran has been legally declared unable to manage their own finances or legal affairs, and a fiduciary or guardian has been appointed, you will need to provide that official paperwork. This applies whether the designation came from VA, a court, the Social Security Administration, or a medical facility. Do not request a fiduciary or guardianship if one has not been appointed. They can be very difficult to deal with. But if one has already been provided, then make sure that the caregiver support team has the documentation, as it is proof that at least one government agency feels that your veteran is in need of supervision and protection. The fourth and most important thing we're going to talk about today is preparing a detailed journal of what you do as a caregiver. For every task that you do, describe why your assistance is needed, what medical condition causes the need for assistance, how much time that assistance takes, and how often it occurs. The more specific you are, the better. And you will use that journal for several tasks. Just a minute, we'll go over what you need to document for PCAFC. So what do you put in your journal? And why do you record that task? And these pages, the activities of daily living page and the supervision, protection, and instruction page, as well as an information sheet on those 4 pieces of information, those links will be mailed to you at the end of the session. So during the application process, you'll go through what's called a Veterans Functional Assessment instrument interview and other interviews. You'll be asked to describe what you do. Personnel from the Caregiver Support Program will interview both you and the veteran, and they'll ask questions about how you assist with each activity of daily living and SPI. I recommend writing down everything over the course of several days, usually a week. Many of the caregiving tasks that you do have become second nature, and you may forget exactly how much you do. So for the first few days, set a timer for every 15 minutes and write down what you've done for your veteran in that time period. For each item that you record in your journal, you should be prepared to explain 3 things: what assistance you provide, why you provide that assistance. In other words, why your veteran can no longer do this task or modify this behavior on their own, and how often you have to do it, whether it's every time they do it, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever the frequency is. In the interviews, especially the Veteran Functional Assessment Instrument interview, caregiver personnel will ask what assistance you provide, Then they will assign a rating based on what you tell them you do. Those designations will fall under one of these categories. Independent, meaning that you provide no help at all when your veteran is completing the task. Setup or cleanup assistance, which means exactly what it sounds like. So if your veteran needs assistance with, let's say, dental care, and you may do setup and cleanup assistance. For example, if your veteran no longer has fine motor skills and can no longer put toothpaste on the toothbrush, and you have to do that for them, that's considered setup and cleanup assistance. If you provide, they may label it as supervision or touching assistance. So, for example, if your veteran has tremors and you place your hand on their elbow so they can take the fork from the plate to their mouth without spilling anything, that would be considered supervision or touching assistance. Partial assistance means you provide less than half of the effort required for a task. Substantial assistance means that you provide more than half of that effort. And dependent means you provide 100% of the physical effort that's needed to do the task. Then there are three extra special categories. One of them is refused, which means exactly what it says it does. The next is not attempted. Not attempted is assigned if there's a specific medical reason that your veteran cannot do that task. For example, your veteran's just had surgery and the surgeon's placed a limitation on that particular type of movement because it would re-injure or inhibit healing because of the surgery. And then the last category is not applicable, which is exactly what it means. So, for example, not applicable would apply if your veteran were bedbound, and we're talking about ambulation. Your veteran would be scored probably as not applicable when we're talking about ambulation. So it's crucial that your explanation matches what you actually do. This determines the level of support that your veteran qualifies for. However, what you say in these interviews is considered objective. And later in this presentation, we will go over how you take that information from the subjective to the objective, things that you can do to make sure that what you say is also viewed objectively. But before we do that, let's talk about activities of daily living. Once again, this sheet lives on our website, and you'll also get a link to it in the email at the end of our presentation. And when you get that link, you can scroll to the bottom of the page, and there is a button here that allows you to either save it as a PDF or to print it. So just know that that's there for all of the sheets that you will receive links to later. So what exactly are the ADLs that the VA judges for PCAFC? First, we have eating, and this refers specifically to the veteran's ability to bring food to their mouth and swallow. It does not include meal preparation. It only includes the act of eating what is placed in front of them and swallowing it safely down into the gullet. It also includes if you have to assist with a feeding tube. Be very specific. If you have to guide a utensil or feed a veteran directly, say so. Explain why you have to do that. In other words, what prevents the veteran from doing it, and also explain the frequency that you have to do it. The second ADL is grooming, and that's broken into two parts. Oral hygiene, which is brushing teeth and managing dentures, and then washing the upper body. So that includes washing, rinsing, and drying the face, hands, chest, and arms. It also includes combing the hair and shaving the face. Be very specific about the type of help you provide and whether the veteran can do part of the task independently. Bathing is the third task, and that includes washing the entire body, but does not include getting into or out of the tub. That will fall under transfers. If you help a veteran wash their back or legs, explain that clearly. Then explain the reason for assistance. Is it balance issues? Is it weakness? Is it they are missing limbs and therefore are unable to wash themselves? Those issues should always be included. The reason for assistance should always be included, as should their frequency. Dressing is our next one. And dressing's divided into three parts: upper body dressing, lower body dressing, and footwear. Each part of dressing also includes whether or not veterans can do and undo fasteners. So for each part of dressing, upper body, lower body, and footwear, you'll need to describe what the veteran can and can't do and what you do, and why they can or cannot do these things independently. Does it have to do with tremors, with fine motor skills, with limited range of motion, with limited mobility? And then again, include the frequency that you have to help them dress and undress. The next one is toileting and hygiene. I want to state one caveat here. If you get paid to provide bowel and bladder care, which is a separate program in the VA, you cannot be paid for toileting under PCAFC. That affects a very small number of people, but just in case you are one of those people, I want to mention that. So toileting hygiene includes cleaning the perineal area and adjusting clothing before and after voiding. It also includes if you have to help your veteran with an ostomy, mention exactly what you have to do to assist with toileting. And that can include getting on and off the toilet, helping a veteran doff and don their clothing, if you actually have to clean the area, or if you have to use like a peri bottle to help clean. Those are all things you should mention. Prosthetics. If your veteran uses prosthetics or orthopedic devices, not braces or belts, but actual replacements or supports for body parts, describe whether and how you help them put them on, adjust them, or remove them, and the frequency with which you do it. And the last activity of daily living is mobility, and mobility covers two areas: positioning and transfers and ambulation. In positioning and transfers, it includes 6 specific movements: rolling in bed, moving from sitting to lying down, moving from lying down to sitting up, moving from sitting to standing, transfers from a bed to chair, or a chair to, let's say, a bath chair, a wheelchair to a bath chair, and getting on and off the toilet. If you provide physical help with any of those transfers, please document it clearly, very specifically what you do. I do want to say, when I have individual calls, individual education calls with caregivers, and I say, please describe to me what you do to get your veteran up in the morning, I usually just hear from caregivers, well, I help them get up in the morning. As you're going through that process of helping your veteran get up in the morning, I want you to very specifically think through these steps in mobility. And as you're doing these interviews, I want you to be very specific about your thoughts, and in your journal about what you do for each of these movements that would be helping a veteran get out of bed. Never just say that you help your veteran get out of bed. Be specific about the help you provide with each of these steps of mobility. The second part of mobility is ambulation, and that can include walking, using a manual wheelchair, or using motorized devices. Be clear about the tasks involved for each form of mobility. So if a veteran uses multiple forms of mobility, like sometimes they walk, and even if they walk with an assistive device like a cane or a rollator, they should be scored for walking. And then if they use a wheelchair or a scooter, they should also be scored under that form of mobility. So be clear about the tasks in which you are involved for ambulation. So if you have to help steer a chair, if you have to help transfer into it, if you have to strap them into it, if you have to monitor for safety, include all of the parts that you have to do and the frequency with which you have to do them. The PCAFC ADL assessment is not just a checklist. It is actually your opportunity to paint a full picture of the daily care that you provide. The more detailed you are, the more likely the veteran's needs will be fully understood and appropriately supported. Remember, you are the expert in your veteran's day-to-day care. So let's move on to supervision, protection, and instruction. The VA Mission Act of 2018 made significant changes to the caregiver support program. It expanded eligibility beyond those post 9/11 veterans and changed the standards for by which caregivers are evaluated. So for supervision, protection, and instruction, the standard is now that caregivers must provide regular care. That means occasional reminders or irregular help will not meet the threshold. There must be a consistent need related to supervision, protection, or instruction. And we're going to walk through the different areas of supervision, protection, and instruction that you'll be asked about and talk about how to describe the support that you provide. And remember, you are recording this during a period of at least a week in your journal. And your job is to be very clear, detailed, and specific so that you can use what you do in the interviews when you go back and look through your journal. So for every SPI related task, you're going to explain three things: what you do, why you do it. In other words, what condition or symptom makes it necessary for you to perform this supervision, protection, and instruction. And then how often you do it. Is it every time? Is it hourly? Is it several times a day? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it multiple times a week? And I want you to remember to be very specific. So the first ADL is medication management. This can include setups, reminders, and direct administration. Explain exactly what role you play and why it's needed. And when I say be specific, I'm going to give you an example. A lot of times when I say to caregivers, do you help with medication? They say, yes, I help with meds. And they stop right there. When I am saying when you are in this interview with your caregiver support personnel and I say be very specific about what you do, this is the kind of answer I would like to hear. I manage 8 medications for my veteran. My veteran cannot remember when or how to take them due to TBI and short-term memory loss. I set up medications in a daily pill organizer and give reminders every morning and night. I also monitor for side effects or missed doses and communicate with the care team. That kind of answer is very specific. It paints a very clear picture of the assistance that you provide for medication management. The second form of SPI that the VA judges is self-preservation. They usually do this through a scenario question like, what would you do in case of an emergency? Or what would you do if you smelled smoke or if there was a fire? And so what they're trying to get at is, does the veteran struggle to make safe decisions in a dangerous or unpredictable situation? Now, your job as a caregiver, if a veteran provides the correct answer, because some of them, and there's a variety of correct answers, right? So it could be, well, if I smell smoke, I would call 911, or if I smelled smoke, I'd get out of the house and then call 911. And then there are some other very wrong answers, and you know them when you hear them. However, as a caregiver, if your veteran knows the right answer, but you know they would not be able to perform that answer, you know, what they say they know they're supposed to do, it is your job at that point as the caregiver to speak up and say, hey, look, he knows what he's supposed to do, or she, but they won't be able to complete that and then explain why they won't be able to complete that. So, for example, I have a couple of veterans that have that are nonverbal, and they might be able to type out, "I'd call 911," but I would then have the speech therapist write a letter that says, while yes, that is the appropriate answer, their ability to call 911 is limited by the fact that they have delayed speech, they have a loss of volume, they have problems, they have aphasia, or whatever the problem would be. So even though they know the right answer, they might not be able to complete it. Also, if a veteran said, well, I know I'm supposed to get out of the house. If your veteran is unable to get out of the house without assistance, that is something the caregiver support personnel needs to know. So just because they know the right answer, if you know that they still can't carry that out, that is important to document here under self-preservation. The next category is self-neglect, and this is an extremely large category. It includes things like substance abuse that can lead to health or safety concerns. So your job as a caregiver is to say yes, or and the veteran is to say yes, the veteran has a substance abuse disorder. And then as the caregiver, your job is to say what interventions and behavior modifications and safety procedures you have in place to ensure the veteran's safety in the face of their substance abuse issues. The second part of self-neglect is behaviors that can pose a threat of harm to self or others. So suicidal ideations and homicidal ideations can fall under this category. So once again, you're talking about monitoring behavior, what you do to monitor for triggers and help veterans avoid triggers, what kind of behavior modifications and interventions you put in place if they start to demonstrate these types of behavior. The next part of self-neglect is dehydration or malnutrition, or the exact opposite of that, which is like water toxicity and overfeeding. And if your veteran has those conditions and what you have to do in those situations. So in that case, you're going to document why the veteran may be subject to dehydration or malnutrition needs, or the opposite, and then what kind of monitoring and interventions you have to do in those situations. Same thing with hygiene that can compromise health. So this would typically be, are you monitoring for bed sores? Are you monitoring for gangrene? Monitoring for sepsis, things like that. Impairment of orientation, memory, reasoning, and judgment. Are there issues with orientation, memory, reasoning, and judgment that would cause a veteran to ignore their need to care for themselves? Inability to manage medication or seek medical treatment that can threaten their health. So if a veteran were to injure themselves, do they have the ability to think through the process to get themselves help? Or if they were if they became extremely ill, would they be able to get themselves help? Safety in general, once again, and then unsafe and unhealthy living conditions. Now, normally the best example, or the most obvious example, would be mental health conditions that lead to like living in hoarding situations. That certainly, or lead to chronic homelessness due to mental health conditions. Those certainly aren't the only situations that would apply under self-neglect, but that's kind of the best example, or the most obvious example I could give you in this situation. So once again, how do you intervene? What modifications do you put in place? What interventions do you put in place to make sure that those things don't happen? So our next category is risk of neglect or exploitation. So is your veteran vulnerable to being taken advantage of or harmed by others? and explain, if that is the case, explain how you monitor or intervene in these situations. This is also a great time to mention if you have a fiduciary, because if your veteran, excuse me, is easily exploited, or the VA or Social Security feels that your veteran may be easily financially exploited by another person, this is, that falls under risk of neglect. So if your veteran falls victims to scams, a lot of times because they can't reason through the financial scams, that falls under risk of neglect, because that's exploitation by another person. The next one is safety inside the home. So let's see. This covers judgment, memory, or decision making that affects safety inside the home. This is also where you can mention ADLs. Do you have to help your veteran use appliances safely? Are they unable to use appliances because maybe they don't understand how to use them anymore? Or is your veteran subject to burn the house down simply because they would set something on the stove and then walk away from it and completely forget that it's there, so it then becomes a fire risk? Those are things about safety inside the home. Does your veteran no longer have feeling, like temperature sensation, so that if they were to put their hands down on a hot stove or get too hot of water, they may actually have blisters and burns? Those monitoring for all of that stuff falls under safety inside the home. This is where you can get your IADLs, those instrumental activities of daily living, things like cooking, cooking and some cleaning can come in under safety inside the home. It's also guardianship could potentially come in there. Safety outside the home is a similar idea to safety inside the home, except actually leaving the home. So helping with, how do you have to help with activities that require remembering, decision making, or judgment? So this falls under, is your veteran likely to wander and get lost? We typically think of this as the best examples are folks with Alzheimer's or dementia that might wander away and get lost, and so they would need to be constantly monitored. Certainly there are other examples, but that would be a good place to, or a good thing to mention here under safety outside the home. Do you have to go with them to ensure that they stay safe in public? That is safety outside the home. Once again, you are going to describe your actual interventions, how you watch for triggers to kind of try and avoid these situations. And then if you can't avoid them, how you intervene and modify those behaviors. The next one is delusions and hallucinations, which are not just delusions or hallucinations. It's any markedly inappropriate behavior that affects a person's daily functioning and social interactions. So it can be delusions and hallucinations. It can also just be completely socially inappropriate behavior that can come with things like, it can come with Alzheimer's. It can come with some forms of Parkinson's. It can come with behavioral frontotemporal lobe disorder, or dementia. So just know that it doesn't just have to be with delusions and hallucinations. It can come with brain injury, where different parts of the brain are impacted, so that regular, appropriate social behavior is, it just doesn't happen anymore. It can also be displayed as catatonic behavior, disorganized speech, thought disorder. So any of those things, once again, you're going to discuss what interventions you take and how often you have to provide those interventions. The next one is agitation, and agitation is your veteran has a tendency or would without intervention to become suddenly, quickly, or upset or violent as displayed through agitation, anger, frustration, and really anxiety can fit in here. You might, sometimes I would say road rage would fit in here. Certainly, markedly inappropriate behavior, starting fights. If you have to deal with a veteran who starts fights out in public on a regular basis because they may, imagine some disrespect. So once again, how are you looking for triggers? How are you modifying behavior and intervening in behavior to talk that down? The next one is impulsivity. The person has a propensity or would without intervention for sudden or spontaneous decisions or actions that may be displayed as a disregard for personal safety. Road rage, suicidal ideations, homicidal ideations, where they're actually going to take action on those things. Wandering, if your person is likely, to get angry and upset and wander away, and then get lost. Say what triggers it and how you handle it, either to avoid that or how you modify or intervene in those behaviors. It can also be spending sprees. And so if you have a fiduciary, because there have been impulsive spending sprees that have then, decimated your bank account, this would also be a time to mention that with your and a fiduciary if you have it. Self-direction is the last one, and this is about legal and cognitive abilities. It is a capacity question. Can your veteran make decisions about their care? Are they able to identify their needs? And can they provide or arrange for their own health or safety? So once again, this would be a time if you have a guardianship where another agency has said this veteran is unable to make safe decisions regarding their welfare. That is usually what guardians are for. They are appointed to care for the welfare of the person. If you have that guardianship, this would be where you mention that. And once again, you'll need to produce that paperwork. So after you've shared all of this information, the caregiver nurse will assign a level to the veteran's needs based on all your answers. And the key criteria is whether the support you provide is on a regular basis. That means that there is a demonstrated pattern of ongoing help and need for help, not just occasional support. So don't downplay what you do. The supervision, protection, and instruction portion of PCAFC is subjective, but it's also critical. Your clarity, your detail, and your examples are what help the VA understand the scope and seriousness of the care that you provide. Remember, you are the expert on your veteran. Be factual, specific, and thorough in giving your examples. So I want to reinforce these standards again. Supervision, protection, and instruction only has to be a regular need. But ADLs, activities of daily living, things that require your actual physical assistance, have to be each and every time. However, some ADLs can be judged, like fall risk, for example, that technically can fit in lots of ADLs. It can actually fall under supervision, protection, and instruction, but you do need to bring it up when you're discussing supervision, protection, and instruction. So, and we've talked about how all of this information, when you're discussing it, on these interviews, it's considered subjective. But in order to find you or to consider this information for PCAFC, the caregiver support program has to be able to find documentation of these needs in an objective manner in the medical record. So how do you get it to become objective information for VA to consider it objective? So the way you're going to do that is to have it paired with objective medical information. When you attend your doctor's appointments or your veterans' doctor's appointments, you are going to bring your journal with you every single time. And you are going to make sure that you discuss with that primary care manager, the PCM, the primary care doctor. You are going to make sure that you are discussing every single thing that you do to assist your veteran during those appointments. You're also going to make sure if the doctor asks your veteran, well, how are you doing? And your veteran responds, fine, but you know, they fell down 5 times last week. They had this outburst here. You had to modify this behavior. They then went off on a spending spree and spent down the bank account to zero. Those are all things you're going to mention in these appointments because you need to make sure that there is documentation, consistent documentation throughout the medical record that the veteran has this need. Remember, you are only going to mention things that are the actual things that are happening in your life, and you're going to use your journal in those appointments to recall what's happened between last appointment with that provider and this appointment with this provider. So make sure that you are using that journal to do that. The next thing you can do is to ask the primary care manager or any of the veteran specialists like neurology, spinal cord, or the pain clinic, rehab, to order an occupational therapy exam. And you're going to ask them to do that to assess for equipment or technology that can help with independence or safety. Or you can ask for an occupational therapy exam so you can use the HISA grant, which is the Home Improvement Structural Adaptation Grant that some veterans have access to. So if you have access to a HISA grant, they will do an OT exam for the veteran to be able to use that. But no matter what, if your veteran has an activity of daily living need, you want that documented through an OT exam. If your veteran has cognitive or mental health issues, you would also request a neuropsych exam if they have not had one in the last 2 years. If they have had one in the last 2 years, then simply ask the primary care manager to notate where that neuropsych report is located in your veteran's record. Also, ensure the primary care manager documents if your veteran can be left alone. If your veteran cannot be left alone, it needs to state that in the record. If they can be left alone, but only for a short period of time, the record needs to also reflect that. And it needs to say why your veteran cannot be left alone. Have the doctor note if your veteran drives. And if they do not drive, document why. Also, you can request a home health aide evaluation for support and caregiving. However, if you request a home health aide evaluation of your veteran and they actually provide you some home health aide hours, use those hours. Do not say, oh, well, we request them, but we don't really want to use them. Use those hours because any notes that a home health agency provides or puts in as they are providing your veteran care or documentation considered objective documentation in the medical record that your veteran needs assistance with those activities or areas of supervision, protection, or instruction. The other thing you can do is there is a PCM input form. It does not just have to go to the primary care manager. So you can certainly ask your caregiver support program team to send it to your veterans' other specialists and also have them fill that out. Righty. It is also important to view your veteran's medical records after every single appointment. When you leave each appointment, wait 24 hours, then check the appointment records, including the nurse's check-in notes for accuracy. And this goes for your civilian providers also. If any information is inaccurate, immediately call or email the doctor and request a correction as nicely as possible. If a provider refuses to make that correction, please contact the patient advocate to get that change made. I will tell you, we are seeing a lot of denials based on nurses' check-in notes. So it is important that you look through your veteran's record after every single appointment. First, to make sure that they notated all the behaviors and issues that you brought up as the caregiver when you saw them. But secondly, to check for accuracy. There is usually a nurse's check-in note and then another note for the actual appointment that you had with the doctor. Nurses' check-in notes, we are finding to be inaccurate, mostly because they are required to fill out about 15 different checklists before they can actually close you out so they can get you to the doctor. I will promise you, none of the information that they are checking that is incorrect is done maliciously. They're just trying to get through those screens so they can get you to the doctor so you can have the maximum amount of face time with the doctor that you can. However, because they're not filling them out accurately, even if the doctor's notes contradict those check boxes, those check boxes are being held against people in their PCAFC decisions. So just say, I know you were in a hurry. I know they were trying to get us to the doctor so we could spend more time with the doctor, but I really need this information filled out correctly. So because they are holding it against us for purposes of the caregiver program. And so I really need it to be accurate. If you will please correct the information in the nurse's check-in notes. And you can say that to the nurse as they're checking your veteran in. I need this to really be an accurate reflection of what you actually see here. Please take your time and do it because they are holding inaccurate information against us for purposes of the caregiver support program. Please also make sure that your veteran's mental health needs and neurological deficits are well documented by the veteran specialty providers. So when Melissa emails you that supervision, protection, and instruction handout on the website, you can give that to your veteran's mental health doctor or their neurologist and ask them to make sure that any need your veteran has under those categories is documented in the record. So I am going to actually have you start typing questions in the Q&A box while I finish up a little bit here. With quality of life, one of the things we do besides this webinar, which is considered a group education call, is we can do individual education calls. And what an individual education call allows us to do is to talk with you, the caregiver, about your actual veteran specific needs and the actual specific things that you do to help the veteran. Another thing that we do because of those individualized education calls is provide a letter to that you can give to your veterans providers called the Supervision, Protection, and Instruction Letter for Providers, and it comes with a questionnaire. And it asks the doctors, if they are VA doctors, to just answer in the record. However, if they are outside providers, because some of you see community care providers or you use Medicare or another form of insurance to see other outside providers, it asks them to provide a letter in that case answering the very specific supervision, protection, and instruction needs, questions about your veterans' needs that you can then give to the VA Caregiver Support Program as a piece of objective medical evidence. We do that through our individualized education calls, and the way you get an individualized education call is, Melissa, if you'll go to that yep. So if you go to our webpage, there is a tab, and our webpage is woundedveteranfamilycare.org. Or you can type QoLFoundation.org. It will get you to the same place. There is an assistance tab up there on that top menu, and then it will take you to our apply for assistance page. Another thing that we do is if you have a denial in hand, and you'd like us to look at it to see whether we think that you have enough information to do an appeal or a supplemental claim or higher level review, you can request that also through that same application. And we will we'll ask you to send the medical records along with your denial letter. We'll look through the records and tell you whether we think there's enough evidence to appeal. A lot of times, what we see in the record is not necessarily that your veteran doesn't have a need for assistance, but that the record itself lacks the evidence of need for assistance. And so our whole process with this is to actually build up the standard or the amount of evidence in the record that is objective evidence so that VA and the Caregiver Support Program are able to approve your application. Because that information, everything you say then must be backed up by evidence, objective evidence in the medical record. So we're looking at those OT exams of neuropsych exams of a repeated pattern of the same issue over and over, diagnostic testing that shows that a veteran has these needs for assistance with their activities of daily living, or this need for supervision, protection, and instruction. The last thing that we do is for caregivers who are already in the caregiver program. They have the option of respite, but sometimes we find that caregivers have a hard time accessing respite. So in that case, we work with the Caregiver Support Program and the caregiver to see that they can get appropriate respite in place when they need it. So if you're interested in any of that, certainly you can apply for assistance on our page. And then once you have all of this information that we talked about today, you've gotten a new copy of the veterans rating, you've kept your journal, you've had conversations with the doctor to get this information in, you've done an OT exam, a neuropsych exam, you have gathered your fiduciary and guardianship paper. If you have that, once you have all of that together, if you are applying for the first time or reapplying, you can certainly at that point submit your 1010 CG. That will begin the formal application process. And we consider like your preparation for this process to be the key in success in getting approved for the program. And remember, if you certainly have any questions about your individual situation, we are certainly more than happy to answer those questions once you fill out an application online. We also don't sell your information or give out your information to anybody without your permission. And the information that we would share, even if we were to give it out, would be basically with another VSO, we would or the VA, and we would not do that without your permission, without talking it over with you first, explaining why we think it's necessary and getting your permission to do it. So let me look if there are any questions. We've got a couple minutes left. Certainly happy to answer any question that you have. If you just want to type that in that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen.